Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly behind the velvet screens of the Forbidden City, where gold roofs glint in the sun. But your world will shrink to a single courtyard. The scent of jasmine doesn't quite cover the mildew. Your silk slippers make no sound on the smooth stone paths, but your heart is loud in your chest. You've just been selected. You don't know how or even why, but you've been chosen to enter the Emperor's inner court. And once you go in, you don't come out the same. The dresses are beautiful. The ceilings are higher than anything you've ever seen. But don't get too excited, you probably won't survive this. Not as you anyway. You'll become someone else entirely. Someone more obedient, more ornamental, and certainly more silent. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is by you. Now dim the lights maybe, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 14, maybe 15. You've never seen the capital before, never worn real silk, but now here you are standing in line with 24 other girls, all chosen from noble or wealthy families across the provinces, though some are from families that owed favors or lost bets. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows some of you were offered up as a kind of tax, a pretty breathing tribute. Your mother cried when you left, not because she thought you were doomed, but because in the wild lottery of court life, even winning feels like losing. There's no luggage. Your old clothes were burned in a ceremony the moment you crossed into the inner city. They gave you a white robe, a hairpin of carved jade not too elaborate, you haven't earned that, and a small scroll with your new name written in brush strokes. The name doesn't feel like yours. It sounds like it belongs to someone who smiles with closed lips and speaks in measured syllables. So you practice. A palace woman instructs you on how to bow. You do it wrong the first time. Of course your sleeve grazes the floor too quickly, or you shift your weight unevenly. She corrects you with the flick of a fan barely touching your wrist. No words. That's how it's done here. Words are risky. The servants around you don't look you in the eye. The guards don't look at you at all. You learn very fast being seen is dangerous, but being too invisible is worse. By your second night, you've already watched a girl get escorted out. No one says why. No one asks. She wasn't screaming, just quietly trembling, her hair coming loose, the jade pin dangling by a thread. You sleep on an embroidered mat that smells faintly of camphor and something sour. You're not allowed to talk after nightfall, but you hear muffled weeping anyway. Some of it might be your own. Historians still argue whether the selection process was more about beauty or politics. Did the emperor personally choose you from portraits and dossiers? Or did eunuchs and ministers do most of the curating, handing him a short list of already approved candidates? Some records say he only met a few face to face. You'll never know which it was for you. Morning comes early. The sun barely rises before the clinking of hair ornaments fills the corridor. You're expected to be upright dressed and poised by the time the first tea tray passes by, whether or not you slept. On your third day, you're finally taken to the Garden of Purity and Harmony, a quiet place almost too serene, where older concubines walk in slow circles feeding carp and pretending not to listen to gossip. You learn not to speak unless asked. You learn the posture of indifference. And somewhere deep inside, you start building a second self, one who listens more than she breathes, who smiles with just her eyes, and who will never again look surprised. Because in the palace, surprise is weakness. You eat rice that tastes like silence. You sip soups you don't recognize. Sometimes your bowl is warm, sometimes it isn't. No one tells you what the ingredients are, and it's probably better that way. By the end of the week, you have learned more about silence than you ever thought possible. And still, the real lessons haven't even begun. You wake up to a face just inches from yours. It's a servant holding a shallow brass dish filled with crushed pearls and finely sifted rice flour. She doesn't speak, just gestures at your face. You nod and let her apply the powder. It's cold, chalky, and clings to every pore like snow refusing to melt. This is the first step of the selection ritual. And no, not everyone makes it through. Once your face has been dusted to the appropriate shade of unnatural paleness, you're shuffled into a room full of small, armless chairs lined up like a silent audience. One by one, the girls are summoned forward to be inspected. Not with warmth or kindness, this isn't an auntie checking on your health. This is more like a livestock auction with embroidery. A court lady tilts your chin up with a thin rod never touching your skin. Touching is not allowed yet. She squints at your teeth. Another woman jots something down. You think she's writing your fortune. In reality, it's probably just has decent posture. They sniff your breath. They check for skin blemishes. Your ears are inspected not for earrings, but for cleanliness. Any hint of wax might be considered lazy, even disrespectful. You are judged on things no one ever warned you about. Your laugh lines, the veins in your wrists, whether your ankles touch when you stand straight. It's both science and superstition, sometimes more of the latter. Some girls are asked to leave immediately. No explanation. A wrinkled nose, a raised eyebrow, and that's it. They're escorted out through a side door. You never see them again. There are tales, half whispers, that one girl once fainted during the inspection and was reassigned to kitchen duty for life. That's considered a mercy. When it's your turn, your knees wobble, but your face stays still. You've practiced the soft gaze in your dorm mirror. You've adjusted your breathing to match the incense clock. You've scrubbed every inch of yourself raw, hoping that physical perfection can be willed into existence through sheer effort. It helps. A little. Acceptable, someone murmurs. And just like that, you've passed the first trial. Later that evening, there's a ceremony. Not for celebration, no. It's more like branding. You and the surviving girls are given new robes, slightly less plain. They're dyed with natural indigo and edged with silver thread. Beautiful, yes, but also itchy. You're not supposed to scratch in public. Scratching is common. You're not common anymore. A eunuch enters to teach you how to walk in half steps. Not full strides, that would be brazen. You learn the proper angle at which to bow, 17 degrees for higher consorts, 22 for lower ones, and which direction your eyes should face while walking past palace officials, down, always down. You even get a crash course in smile categories, closed lip delight, fond neutrality, mirthful disinterest. Each has its own moment. Each must be used like a weapon. And just like weapons misuse can get you into trouble. Historians still debate how much of this ritualistic etiquette was enforced universally across dynasties. Some argue the Tang period was more relaxed. Others insist the Qing court took formality to the point of absurdity. But regardless of which emperor you serve, the core message remains the same. Your body is not yours. It's a canvas for protocol. One of your tasks the next day is to learn how to kneel without creasing your dress. It sounds easy. It isn't. The hem must fan out perfectly, the sleeves must drape just so, and your back must remain a vertical line even while your knees scream in protest. If you mess it up, they don't yell. They just make you do it again, and again, and again, until your bones stop arguing. And then there's the writing test. No, they're not checking for brilliance. They just want to see if your brushwork is elegant. Your characters should look effortless, not ambitious. Big, bold flourishes are for poets. You are not a poet. You are part of the imperial atmosphere. You write a poem about bamboo bending in the wind. It's short, slightly wobbly. A palace tutor nods once. That counts as high praise. Finally, on the 7th day, you're summoned to the Lotus Gallery, where you and the other approved girls will be assigned your first placements. You hope for something close to the central court, somewhere the emperor might stroll past once in a while. Instead, you're sent to the plum wing, quiet, distant, shaded most of the day. It's an honorable position, the senior attendant assures you. Many concubines have started there. You notice she doesn't mention how many stayed. That night, a girl in the bed next to you whispers, "Don't smile too much. They'll think you're scheming." You nod even though you weren't planning to smile at all. The plum wing is technically inside the palace complex, but it might as well be a different planet. You're surrounded by walls so high you can't see the sky unless you lean just right. The stone paths curve on purpose to discourage straight lines, which the palace architects believed invited too much haste. Your quarters are small but ornate. Lacquered wood screens, a carved dressing bench, even a tiny scroll painting of cranes in flight. It looks expensive. But the moment the door closes, the silence thickens into something else. You're not sure if it's peace or just a lack of options. The morning after your arrival, a eunuch arrives to explain your daily duties. His voice is soft measured, like a man who has been doing this far too long. You may not leave the wing without escort. You must greet senior consorts with full kneel unless otherwise stated. You may not initiate conversation with palace officials, and you may not under any circumstance speak directly to the emperor unless spoken to. He recites these rules without looking at you. You wonder how many names he's forgotten. Then comes the hierarchy lesson. You, for now, are a third-rank attendant. That sounds vaguely impressive until you learn there are 9 ranks of concubines, and each rank has 3 tiers. There are noble consorts, imperial concubines, talented ladies, women of presentation, and then you. It's not just ceremonial. Each rank determines how many attendants you get, what kind of dishes you're served, and even how close your quarters are to the center of the palace. The closer you are, the more likely you are to catch the emperor's attention. Not that you'd say that out loud. Historians still argue how much power low-ranked concubines actually had. Some believe they were virtually invisible. Others point to rare stories of lesser-ranked women rising through sheer cunning. What they agree on is this: the odds were not in your favor. Still, everything in the palace runs on appearances. Even if your title carries no weight, you must behave as if it might someday. Your every movement could be observed, and sometimes the most dangerous observer is the one smiling back at you. You learn to read body language the way others read poems. The tilt of a rival's fan, the subtle lift of an eyebrow, the long pause before answering a simple question. all of these are weapons. You're not paranoid if they really are watching you. One afternoon, a girl from the Orchid Pavilion strolls past your courtyard. She's higher ranked than you, maybe second tier. She says nothing, just passes by her satin sleeves, swaying a tiny smirk on her face. Later, you find pebbles scattered across your laundry. A harmless prank, maybe. Or maybe it's a warning. Either way, you carefully shake out each garment, fold them neatly, and say nothing. This is the game you're playing now, whether you want to or not. During your first official court gathering, you're placed in the back row, which honestly is a relief. Fewer eyes on you. You kneel for what feels like hours. The stone floor presses into your knees until your whole lower body hums with discomfort. One of the older consorts is asked to play the guqin. She does so with eerie precision, so precise in fact that it's hard to tell if the music is meant to impress or terrify. You clap at the end, not too loudly, just enough to be noticed without being remembered. Your strategy becomes this: be present but unremarkable. The food is another lesson in ranking. Higher consorts get plates carved from jade or glazed in blue and white porcelain. You get pale earthenware. Still pretty, just not worth noticing. Some days the rice comes hot. Other days it's lukewarm and clearly reheated. The broths are thin. The duck is rare. The pickles are generous, but sometimes suspiciously bitter. One morning, a fellow attendant pulls you aside and warns you not to eat the lotus root if it's more than 2 days old. Tastes the same, she says. But trust me, your stomach will remember. You're grateful, but you file that moment away. She helped you now, sure, but favors in the palace are rarely free. And then there's the matter of greetings. You're expected to perform a full ceremonial bow every time you pass someone of higher status, and they all seem to be higher status. That means kneeling, over and over, even on gravel, even in the rain, even when your knees are already raw. Some girls cheat by stuffing padded cloth under their robes. One gets caught. The punishment isn't public, but she's not seen for days, and when she returns, she limps slightly. You make a mental note, never be too clever unless you're sure you're the cleverest one in the room. At night, you hear whispered lessons from the room next to yours. A younger girl being coached. Don't touch your face when nervous. Keep your shoulders down. Smile from the left side, it's more refined. The voice teaching her is old, tired, but still sharp. Maybe a former favorite who knows she'll never be summoned again. You don't know if she's helping or preparing the girl for sacrifice. Either way, you listen closely. The real lessons are never taught during daylight. You start each morning with lessons designed to erase you. Not erase your presence entirely, just the parts that make you unpredictable. You're taught to sip tea without noise, to bow from the diaphragm, to speak in poetry when you want something, and silence when you don't. The instructors are patient in the way sand is patient, relentless grain by grain. There's no yelling, no scolding, just the quiet repetition of rules until they settle into your bones. You begin to answer questions with questions. You smile even when your stomach is churning. Your name is used less often. More frequently, you're referred to by title. Third rank attendant, recite the Tang verse again. Third rank attendant, your gesture was stiff. You nod and comply. It's safer that way. The calligraphy instructor corrects your brush grip with the tip of a feather fan never touching you. A crooked line is a crooked soul, she says lightly. You want to ask if that's true for people who only write in secret, but you say nothing. You're learning how to exist invisibly and also how to sparkle without shining too bright. A paradox only palace life can perfect. One day, you're taken to the music hall for lute lessons. It's not because they want you to perform. It's because concubines are expected to be ornaments of taste. No one wants you to be a master musician just good enough to imply refinement. Like a still pond pretending it has depth, you pluck carefully. The strings cut your fingers at first, but you don't flinch. Pain is private here. Later, you're told to memorize 6 classical poems about longing and separation. You whisper them into the dark while lying in bed, not because you enjoy them, but because reciting them aloud is the only time you're allowed to admit how trapped you feel. Historians still argue one of your tutors mutters over her fan one day whether these lessons were meant to elevate you or simply tame you. She smirks. I suppose it depends on whether the emperor ever bothers to learn your name. That night, you lie awake thinking about that, about whether you're being educated or defanged. And then there's the smile room. No one calls it that officially, of course. It's just another chamber tucked away behind a curtained corridor. Inside, you're taught facial expressions, how to radiate charm without seeming forward, how to laugh without showing teeth, how to express sadness so artfully it flatters the viewer. You spend a full hour practicing pleasant surprise. You do it 23 times. No one laughs. By the second month, you find yourself responding to emotions with habits, not reactions. Someone drops a plate. You don't even blink. A rival brushes past you with too much shoulder. You glide sideways like you're floating. You've become water-shaped by protocol. Meals become less about food and more about form. You're expected to eat, slowly take small bites, and never finish before the others. One day you forget and reach for a dumpling too early. The woman next to you smiles, not at you, past you. Later a bowl arrives with unusually bitter herbs. You force it down. A quieter girl in your wing May begins to unravel, not with screaming or rebellion, just stillness. She stops responding, sits in the garden unmoving for hours. No one addresses it. Eventually a physician is summoned. He leaves with a scroll and a nod. The next morning May is gone. You don't ask. You water her orchids instead. Among yourselves you whisper tips and tricks. How to walk in embroidered shoes without tripping. Which servant might share rumors for a sliver of cake. Which courtyard offers 10 minutes of unmonitored sun before breakfast call. But mostly you whisper about who got noticed. Noticed means summoned. Summoned means remembered. Remembered means possibility. Possibility is a dangerous thing to want. You're told the emperor walks the moon path some nights. That if you're lucky, you might be invited to recite poetry beneath the lanterns. That it's rare, but not impossible. That one girl once composed a single haiku so beautiful, she was elevated to the 2nd rank. Historians debate this story. Some say it's a fiction made by desperate concubines to keep hope alive. Others claim it happened during the reign of the Yongjung Emperor, a rare instance of literary merit overtaking lineage. Either way, you start composing in your head. Even if no one ever reads them, they help you stay sharp. Your world has shrunk, but inside it you build invisible palaces of memory fantasy and silent rebellion. When your tutor next asks you to recite a Confucian verse, you do so perfectly and wonder if he hears the edge buried in your voice. You're learning how to perform emptiness, and no one can tell whether that makes you strong or just better at hiding. You wake to the scent of boiled millet and sandalwood. Your bedding is damp from the summer air, but the chill on the floor seeps in anyway. It's breakfast rice again, but served in new bowls edged with green glaze. A gift from a visiting dignitary, someone whispers. The palace doesn't throw anything away. Not even you. Your robe is light green today. It matches nothing you own, but was assigned without explanation. Palace colors are not fashion statements. They're silent communiques. You're learning to read them like footnotes in a very passive-aggressive book. Today, your meal is warm. That feels suspicious. The serving maid doesn't meet your eyes. That feels more suspicious. You wait for the first bite, watching the others. No one flinches. Still you nibble like a test subject. Tastes normal. A little bland. But then again, that's not unusual either. Historians still debate whether concubine meals were regularly tampered with, spiced with laxatives, diluted with sedatives, or simply neglected. Some argue these stories are exaggerations. Others point to chronicles of accidental discomfort linked with fluctuating palace hierarchies. Either way, you eat slowly now, and you trust your own cooking the least. Later at midday prayers, your stomach makes an alarming gurgle. You cough to cover the noise. The woman beside you, rank 2, silk sleeves like liquid moonlight, glances your way, but says nothing. She doesn't have to. You spend most of the afternoon walking in slow, deliberate ovals beneath the eaves. You can't go outside the wing, but you can do laps through the same 7 potted trees. The petals fall just fast enough to remind you of passing time and just slow enough to feel like they're mocking you. When the physician makes his rounds, you press your palms flat to your thighs and pretend not to flinch. You don't need anything you say. He nods, but he lingers. You're thinner, he mutters. Maybe drink less tea. Less tea. Tea is all you have. Later in your quarters, you examine your reflection. Your face looks like it belongs to someone who reads too much and eats too little. Your lips are pale. Your skin is perfect because perfect skin is your job. Still you look unfinished. And that's when you understand, in the palace, you are meant to look as though you've never suffered, even as suffering becomes your full-time occupation. Beauty is a battlefield here, and you're the terrain. Your daily routine starts including strange additions. Crushed pearl powder under the tongue. Lead-tinged eyeliner that stings a little too much. A vinegar rinse for your hair that leaves it gleaming but makes you lightheaded. None of these are medically sound, but they are correct, which in palace terms matters far more. Your skin is supposed to be translucent, not just pale translucent, like a plum blossom petal at dawn. You memorize phrases like this because you hear them so often they begin to override your native language. You're not tired, you're listless. You're not lonely, you're emotionally contained. A new tutor arrives from the inner chambers, a woman known only as Lady Yi. She's older, her face nearly frozen from years of holding the same gentle expression. She teaches aesthetic stillness, not silence. Stillness. How to sit in a room without disturbing it. How to exist like part of the decor. You last 11 minutes before she corrects your breath rhythm. Lady Yi says hunger sharpens your cheekbones, but too much will make you brittle. You take that to mean eat just enough to survive, but no more. A practical suggestion disguised as philosophy. Later that week, your foot slips on a wet tile and your chin hits the ground. The bruise isn't visible, but that's almost worse, because now you wince involuntarily every time you smile, and involuntary reactions are dangerous. To hide it, you develop a new way of smiling. Less cheek, more eyes. It becomes your default. You overhear a senior consort compliment it. That's as close to safety as you'll ever get. There's an unspoken game among the lower ranks who can appear the most composed while being the most miserable. The trick is to look like a painting of a happy moment, not an actual happy moment. Real joy is unpredictable. Paintings are not. You practice with Mei Lin, one of the few girls who still dares to be funny. She teaches you how to simulate laughter by breathing through your nose and tilting your head. It reads as refined delight, she says. But it's also perfect when someone says something stupid and outranks you. You test it the next day during embroidery hour. It works. Later, Mei Lin tells you about a girl who once tried to dye her robes a shade brighter than her station allowed. The dye bled in the laundry. The girl didn't get punished, but suddenly her meals started arriving late. Then her attendance changed. Then she was reassigned to linen folding duties. She didn't complain, just faded. You fold that story into your memory palace somewhere between Don't Eat Lotus Root and Never Laugh First. And through all of it, you smile. Carefully, consistently, beautifully. Because in the palace, even your hunger must look elegant. There's a saying whispered among attendants. Your beauty opens the door. Your suffering decorates the room. You never understood it until now. The cosmetics arrive before sunrise. Tiny porcelain jars lined on a silver tray. One for foundation, one for blush, one for something labeled only as skin clarity. You're not sure what's in that one, but it smells faintly of vinegar and crushed magnolia. You apply it anyway. You always apply it. Because if you don't look luminous, someone will notice. And when someone notices, they might start watching. And when people watch, things happen. You're expected to maintain a look that borders on divine, white as porcelain, lips like lacquer, eyebrows arched but not expressive. Historians argue whether these ideals were influenced more by court fashion or by classical painting styles. Either way, they're enforced more strictly than any written law. Today's ritual is face taping. Yes, strips of cloth pulled tight behind your ears, tucked into your hairstyle to subtly lift your cheekbones and narrow your jawline. It works. Kind of. You feel like a marionette. Your attendants avoid looking directly at you. It's hard to say whether it's out of respect or secondhand embarrassment. By mid-morning, your face aches. You keep smiling. You are a walking masterpiece, a curated illusion. But illusions by nature are fragile. One girl, Jen, is caught without her face paste. It's not defiance, she simply ran out. No one told her more had to be requested 3 days in advance. She arrives to morning call with nothing on her cheeks but the light flush of embarrassment. She is not corrected, not punished, not even addressed. Instead, she is excluded, quietly. Meals that no longer arrive hot. Invitations that don't arrive at all. No one even gossips about her, which is somehow worse. After a week, Jen asks to return to the outer residence. Her request is granted, politely, efficiently. She leaves in silence. You don't run out of anything again. That afternoon, a new shipment of beauty pearls arrives. They're not for jewelry. You crush them into paste and apply the mixture to your face every third night. It's supposed to give your skin a translucent glow. In reality, it smells like chalk and makes your skin feel like papyrus. You wonder how many actual pearls have passed through your face by now. Some girls ingest the powder. They believe it keeps the voice soft. One day, someone chokes mid-meal. The pearl dust cakes in her throat. She recovers, but not before the story spreads through the entire wing. You stop swallowing yours. Still, there's always something new. Bird nest masks for elasticity. Egg white balms for shine. A vinegar soak for your hands that makes them pale, but stings like betrayal. You begin to categorize your pain, stinging, throbbing, numbing. Some days you genuinely forget what your bare skin feels like. Historians still debate how much these routines were enforced versus expected. Were the women pushed by rules, or did they push themselves to survive the expectations? The answer, of course, is yes. One evening, you're summoned for the monthly aesthetic review. It's not as official as it sounds, but it matters more than anything else. You line up in the Moon Pavilion, 10 girls in a row. You've each chosen your best robe, your softest expression, your safest hairstyle. The palace stewards walk past with clipboards. They don't speak. They don't smile. You pass. That's all you get. A nod. One moment of not being dismissed. Afterward, everyone acts like nothing happened, but you catch the tiny sighs of relief, the way a girl's shoulders soften slightly, the way another finally lets herself blink. At night, you lie down with a silk cloth tied around your chin to preserve the shape. You sleep flat on your back like a sculpture. You're too afraid of pillow creases. Even dreaming feels like a luxury. And yet there are moments, fleeting, barely noticeable, but real. When the moon hits your water basin just right, casting light over the ripple of your reflection. When you share a silent smile with one of the other girls over some unspoken joke. When a breeze carries in the scent of jasmine and you remember your mother once wore a dress that smelled like that. You hold on to those moments like pearls, not to crush into powder, just to keep. They're yours. And in a place where nothing belongs to you, not your body, not your time, not even your name, that means something. You're called at dusk. Not by names are soft currency here, easily devalued, but by rank and location. Third-rank attendant from the plum wing. The eunuch doesn't even look up from his scroll. He doesn't need to. You already know what this means. You've been summoned. Not officially, not to the imperial bedchamber that would involve a flurry of red candles, ritual foot baths, and an entire platoon of handmaidens with incense sticks. This is subtler, a small gathering in the pavilion of gentle harmony. The emperor is expected to stroll through, and you're expected to be seen. Panic and excitement braid themselves in your stomach like tangled ribbons. You're given exactly 1 hour to prepare. That's both too much time and not nearly enough. Your attendants work like silent clockwork. One brushes your hair into the butterfly knot. Another applies rouge that smells faintly of ginseng, while a third secures your robe's sash just tight enough to hint at your figure without being vulgar. Historians still argue whether these encounters were planned or spontaneous. Some scholars believe they were carefully staged theater. Others insist the emperor liked surprises. But none of that matters to you right now. Because in this moment, you are prey on the edge of a meadow, waiting for a predator who may or may not look your way. When you arrive at the pavilion, you're not alone. 4 others have been summoned too. One is Mei Lin. She squeezes your hand discreetly, then releases it just as quickly. No alliances here, not when attention is a zero-sum game. The emperor enters like a breeze suddenly, and without fanfare. You hear him before you see him. Not his voice, but the reactions. Quiet shifts in posture. Subtle glances. A tremor in the sleeve of a woman adjusting her hair. He stops in front of you. You lower your eyes as trained. The floor is polished wood. You focus on a reflection of his boots. He asks your name. You recite your title and assigned name with perfect cadence. You do not add anything, not even a smile. Pretty, he says, then moves on. That's all. Pretty. The word hangs in your ears like a chime knocked askew by wind. Later that night, back in your quarters, the attendants bustle around you more energetically than usual. A second robe is delivered, deep crimson embroidered with cloud motifs. An upgrade, temporarily at least. You weren't chosen. Not truly. But you were noticed. And in the palace, noticed is the first step to remembered. For the next few days, things shift. Your rice arrives hotter. You're offered 2 kinds of soup. A second handmaid is assigned to your quarters. She's quiet and observant, probably there to monitor more than assist. You accept her presence with the same polite numbness you've developed for everything else. But the emperor does not return. Not to the plum wing. Not to you. You offer now a footnote in his long day. Maybe he had a preference for someone else. Maybe he forgot. Or maybe you simply reminded him too much of someone he already cast aside. You don't know. You won't be told. You'll just watch and wait and wonder. Malin is summoned the following week. She doesn't return until dawn. When she does, she doesn't speak. She just sits by the water basin and washes her hands for a very long time. Was it everything we imagined, you whisper, trying to offer warmth? She looks at you. Not angry. Not sad. Just hollow. There was a parrot in the room, she says finally. It kept repeating someone else's name. Then she stands, dries her hands, and goes to bed. That's the closest either of you will ever get to discussing it. You begin to understand that being forgotten isn't the worst thing here. Being remembered briefly and then discarded, that's far more dangerous. It invites envy, gossip, invisible punishments. A few days later, your robe privileges are quietly rolled back. Your second soup stops arriving. The second handmaid vanishes. You're not demoted, but you are reset. And that hurts in a way you hadn't prepared for. Because for a moment you believed. You let yourself imagine being chosen. Now you are reminded gently, firmly that your purpose is not to ascend. It's to exist in graceful suspension, like a lantern too delicate to burn. At night you watch the wind move through the lattice of your window. You breathe with it, slow and careful. The emperor might not remember your name, but you do. And that will have to be enough. You begin sleeping lighter, not out of choice, but necessity. The palace doesn't reward deep sleepers. A knock could come at any hour, a new assignment, a surprise inspection, a rival's trap disguised as a gift. You keep one ear open at all times like a cat waiting for a floorboard to creak. It's not the emperor you fear, not really. It's the others, the quiet ones with sweet smiles and silent feet, the older consorts whose titles are longer than your life, the eunuchs who glide like ghosts and whisper to walls. You don't know who listens to whom, so you assume everyone listens to everyone. In the plum wing, no one raises their voice. That would be undignified. But dignity here is a weapon. It cuts more deeply than rage ever could. It starts with your pillows. They're replaced one morning with slightly firmer ones. Not a demotion technically, but a subtle inconvenience. a reminder that someone noticed your brief rise and intends to apply gravity. Next comes the servant rotation. Your laundry girl is reassigned. The new one is efficient but never looks you in the eye. She folds your undergarments with surgical precision and never once calls you by name. You ask Mei Lin about it during embroidery hour. Someone's nudging you back into your lane? She says without looking up. Probably harmless. For now. You nod, but the needles in your lap begin to blur. Not from emotion, from exhaustion. Historians still argue how much informal power palace women wielded, especially those who were never official favorites. Some records suggest low-ranked concubines formed quiet alliances, passing coded messages through fans or painted silks. Others insist most simply faded into ornamentation. But here's what you know for sure. Silence doesn't mean safety. Sometimes it just means strategy. One night while brushing your hair, you find a strand tucked with a fine black thread. It's barely visible, but clearly placed. A warning, a marker. You show no reaction. You burn it with a candle and tell no one. The next day, a girl from the orchid pavilion accidentally spills tea on your robe. She apologizes profusely. Her voice is syrup. You thank her graciously and excuse yourself. That night, your soup arrives with twice the usual amount of ginger. Subtle, almost clever. You eat it anyway. If you show discomfort, they'll know it worked. That's the rhythm now. Observe, deflect, survive. Your letters, if you can call them that, are limited to short seasonal greetings sent to your family through imperial scribes. They are read rewritten and resealed by court officials before they ever leave the palace walls. You try writing a coded message once using an old poem your mother taught you as a cipher. The reply contains no cipher, just a drawing of a peony and a line of poetry that translates to, "The moon is lovelier in silence." You never try again. One afternoon, the head eunuch visits for an informal wellness round. He smiles like a man who's never had to mean it. He asks if your quarters are comfortable, whether you're content with your meals, how your health has been. You nod. You bow. You flatter. Later that night, the vinegar jar you usually use for hand soaking is replaced with rose water. It's fragrant but sticky. Another small nudge. You adjust. In the palace, you don't escalate. You endure. There's a story among the girls of a former concubine who tried to report a rival for tampering with her food. The report reached the emperor's clerk, who then passed it to the accused. 2 days later, the accuser was moved to the outer compound due to stress. The lesson: don't be right too loudly. Still, you adapt. You start sleeping with your jewelry tucked inside your sash. You rotate your cosmetics so none appear overused. You praise the robe colors you're given even when they wash you out. You thank the girl who spilled the tea on you twice. At a poetry recitation, you smile at a verse about a plum tree surviving winter. The room is silent. One consort nods approvingly. That night, your soup arrives warm again. Tiny victories. You hold them gently, like birds you're not allowed to keep. You tell yourself this is not losing. This is staying alive in a house made of mirrors. At the evening bell, you step outside for a moment of air. The moonlight catches the edge of your sleeve, and for a brief instant, you almost look free. But only almost. It begins with a mist cycle. You've tracked them quietly in the margins of your poetry scrolls. You've never spoken the word aloud. Not here. Not even to Mei Lin. But when the second one slips by, unnoticed by all except you, the implication becomes harder to deny. You might be pregnant. That simple possibility shifts your entire reality. Not in a joyful way, no soft lullabies, no congratulatory smiles, but in a quiet, suffocating kind of terror. Because in the palace, a child doesn't just make you a mother, it makes you a threat. You say nothing. You smile more. You eat slightly more. You walk carefully and avoid lifting anything heavier than a fan. You wait. You are not alone in this. The plumwing is not known for its fertility. Most girls cycle in and out of favor before anything can take root, but it's happened before. There are stories none told directly of girls who rose in rank through motherhood, and of others who vanished before their child could take a breath. Historians still argue whether the imperial harem fostered pregnancies or feared them. Some claim emperors actively sought heirs. Others point to records of competition so fierce that any signs of pregnancy were hidden as long as possible to avoid retaliation from higher-ranked consorts. One afternoon, while walking through the covered corridor between the gardens, you feel dizzy. Just for a moment, not enough to fall, but enough to catch the attention of a passing attendant. "Shall I fetch a physician?" she asks too quickly. You hesitate. She notices. "I've been fasting for clarity," you say with a gentle smile. Perhaps too much clarity. She nods. Maybe she believes you. Maybe she doesn't. The next day, your soup tastes slightly saltier. And the day after that, a package of dried hawthorn berries is delivered to your room unrequested. A coded message. A test A signal. You don't eat them. You burn them. There is no safe answer anymore. You see Mei Lin only in passing now. She's often summoned elsewhere. Her rise has been quiet but steady. One night she leaves a folded note beneath your pillow. A single line written in her delicate brushwork. Don't trust smiles during sweet rain. It's an old proverb. Could mean anything. Could mean everything. By the third week, your body confirms what you feared. The signs are unmistakable. Your robes fit tighter. You're warmer than usual, and your emotions feel like a river threatening its banks. But still you say nothing. Because once you say it, the game changes. A pregnancy brings temporary power, yes, but also scrutiny, rivalry, danger. You will be monitored. You will be isolated. You will become a political chess piece in a game you've only ever seen from the side of the board. When you finally report it through the proper whisper to the proper attendant, it's done with the same tone you might use to mention rain is expected tomorrow. Calm, measured, inevitable. The palace responds immediately. Your quarters are changed. You are moved closer to the central residence. Not into it, of course, that's reserved for the empress and senior consorts, but close enough to be noticed. You are assigned new attendants. Your meals are upgraded, though you're also required to eat in the presence of a food tester. You begin each meal by watching someone else sip your broth first. Every time they don't fall over, you breathe a little easier. There's a physician now, not the old one from before, a new man younger with less patience. He checks your pulse every other morning and makes notes in a small red book you're not allowed to read. And then come the gifts. Painted fans, spools of silk, a box of candied walnuts, a robe stitched with cranes. None of them have names attached. That's the most unnerving part. You're being courted in secret by people who are not supposed to be watching. Some hope you rise. Some hope you fail. And some perhaps just hope you disappear quietly. You receive a visit from Lady Yi. She sits on your porch, fanning herself with a lazy elegance that only 20 years of palace survival can teach. Be careful, she says after a long pause. It is better to be the root than the fruit. You nod as if that explains anything. That night your dreams are strange. You're walking through the palace gardens, only they're underwater. The koi fish are flying. The moon is a pearl in your hand, and everyone who smiles at you has no eyes. You wake up sweating. The next morning, the Empress sends word. Not a visit, just word. A formal recognition of your condition. Congratulations phrased with immaculate detachment. She hopes your upcoming months will be harmonious. The implication, of course, is that any disharmony will be considered your fault. You bow to the message scroll before burning it. There is no joy in this, but there is clarity. You are no longer invisible. But that doesn't make you safe. It makes you central. And in this palace, that's often the most dangerous place to be. It happens quietly. One morning, the physician's hand lingers a little too long on your wrist. His brow furrows. He doesn't say much, just recommends a soup adjustment and leaves faster than usual. The red book he keeps has a folded corner now. That's new. Later, your usual attendant is replaced for the afternoon. The new girl is gentle, too gentle. She speaks with a voice like powdered sugar and watches your every move with the wide eyes of someone pretending not to assess you. You smile at her anyway. You're excellent at that now. But inside, your heart begins to fold in on itself. Because you know, even before the confirmation, even before the whisper through the lattice wall, you know, the child is gone. There's no announcement, no weeping, no drama. Only a quiet change in rhythm. Your pulse is no longer counted twice daily. Your food returns to its regular bowls. The gifts stop arriving. The guards stationed outside your room disappear overnight as if they'd never existed. And you remain. There is no ceremony for this. No mourning. No one in the plum wing says anything directly. But they all know. Some offer subtle glances of sympathy. Others less kindly look relieved. One girl even appears smug for an entire afternoon, then has the decency to pretend it's because of a new hairpin. You don't cry. That would make it real. Instead, you drink tea with both hands and recite the plum blossom poem until the words lose all meaning. Historians still argue about how often imperial pregnancies ended this way. Some records are clear, others are scrubbed. It's possible that more children were lost than born, an unfortunate side effect of both primitive medicine and poisonous rivalry. But no scroll ever recorded the grief of a concubine sitting alone with her hands folded over an empty belly, trying to remember which breath was the last one that still felt hopeful. You begin to walk more. Slowly, aimlessly through the covered corridors and tiled gardens, you pass the koi pond without looking in. You used to like the fish. Now their circles feel too familiar. A week later, the Empress sends you a gift, a single white silk scarf delicately embroidered with bamboo leaves. No note, just the scarf. It's lovely and useless. You fold it carefully and hide it beneath your bedding. Then comes the shift in tone. No one scolds you. No one demotes you. But the warmth you'd been allowed to borrow seeps away like spilled ink. You're told your embroidered robe is too ornate for your station. You're asked to stop attending poetry readings while you rest. Your window seat, once sunlit for hours, is mysteriously blocked by a new potted tree. You are no longer a rising flame. You are a cooling ember. Maylin visits one afternoon, her eyes darting with the careful awareness of someone who can't afford to be too close. "I'm sorry," she says softly. I didn't, but you nod. That's all that needs to be said. Then, to your surprise, she reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a tiny folded square of mulberry paper. Inside is a dried plum blossom. It fell from the tree last week, landed in my lap. Thought you might want it. You don't cry, but you do press the paper between your palms like prayer. Later that evening, a junior attendant offers to light your incense early. Her hand trembles slightly as she holds the match. You wonder if she's afraid of catching your misfortune, like it's contagious. That night you have another dream, only this time the palace is empty. No footsteps, no chatter, just endless corridors and doors that open to more doors. You walk for hours and never find the center. When you wake, there's dew on your window and a faint soreness in your chest. You sit up. You pour tea. You recite your verses. You arrange your robe. You continue. Because stopping is not allowed. There is no ceremony for this, but you invent your own. You place the dried blossom on your windowsill. You light the gift scarf on a single stick of incense until the thread blackens slightly. You hum a tune you can't remember learning. And when the bell tolls for morning duties, you rise like nothing has changed, because in the palace your sorrow is yours alone, invisible, odorless, tidy, folded up and hidden beneath silk like the truth behind a painted smile. They call it a promotion. One morning, a scroll arrives with a red seal and a line of brush strokes so fine you almost miss your own name. You're to be elevated to noble lady of the 5th rank. It sounds important, elevated, dignified, official. And yet the moment the announcement is read aloud, the plumwing is silent. No congratulations, no fanfare, just polite nods and swift glances that don't linger long enough to be seen as alliances. Because everyone knows the truth. You are being shelved. Promotions can mean many things in the palace. Favor, yes. Reward sometimes. But more often, they're a way of moving you aside without causing waves. A gentle gesture that says, you have been acknowledged. Now kindly remove yourself from the narrative. Still you bow. You offer thanks. You receive your new robe deeper in color, trimmed in gold. You're assigned a second attendant. A different corridor. A slightly larger room with a faint echo in its corners. You have never felt so invisible. Historians point out that promotions in the inner court were not always about merit or affection. Sometimes they were simply logistics, a way to balance the hierarchy, keep the records tidy, rotate the cast so the audience, if there even is one, doesn't get bored. Your new quarters are in the Garden of Moonlight Shade, a poetic name for a space that rarely sees direct sun. The windows are narrow. The plants outside your room are chosen for their quiet growth: ferns, mosses, shade-loving vines that don't bloom and never attract bees. Your footsteps echo here. Your voice feels too loud when you hum. You still participate in ceremonies, but you're further back now. Still expected to be graceful, but no longer expected to dazzle. Your vase moved to the corner of the shelf, still part of the collection, but no longer featured in the tour. You try not to take it personally. You try. At least the meals are consistent. The soup arrives at the same time every day, perfectly warm. The rice is softer. Someone even includes a sprig of mint once, a tiny kindness from an anonymous hand. Or maybe just a new cook. Your new attendant Gia is younger and clumsy with hairpins, but careful in silence. She asks nothing. offers everything. The second week, she brings you a pressed flower in a folded cloth. "I thought it looked like your old courtyard," she says. You nod, unsure whether to feel comforted or insulted. The truth is, you do miss it. You miss the corner of the plum wing that caught the morning sun, the faint giggle of Maylin from across the hallway, the crooked tile near the tea house that always made your steps stutter like a second heartbeat. It wasn't perfect, but it was yours. Here, everything feels staged, polished, neutral. Even the guards seem less interested. They escort you with the efficiency of men guarding a decorative screen, necessary but hardly thrilling. You once asked during a lesson how long a concubine typically remained in the inner court. The tutor answered with a sigh, "Until she becomes a memory." You didn't understand it then. You do now. Still, you fulfill your duties. You kneel when expected. You recite the poetry. You submit your seasonal greetings in careful script. You attend musical recitals and applaud with the required serenity. You pretend not to notice the newer girls watching you with a mix of awe and dread. You are what they might become. One evening during moon watching, a junior concubine sits beside you. She's bright-eyed, lips red with beetroot dye, and nervous in the way all newly arrived girls are. "Is it true," she whispers, "that once you're a noble lady, you're safe?" You turn to her slowly. "Safe from what you ask?" She doesn't answer, just blushes and rises to leave. You watch her go, her steps too quick, her robe too loud. She'll learn. Later, you walk through your garden and notice a small path of disturbed earth near the ferns. Someone's buried an old hairpin there, maybe as an offering, maybe as a farewell. You stare at the mound for a long time, then walk away without touching it. This is what a noble lady does, endures. You think about writing another poem. Something about moss. Something about how it thrives without sunlight. Something about stillness being a kind of survival. You don't write it. You already live it. You wake up colder than usual. Your room hasn't changed, not visibly. The floor is still stone. The bedding still lined with silk. The tiny incense dish still half filled with ash from the night before. And yet the air feels wrong. As if someone opened a window in your sleep and invited winter in, even though it's barely autumn. Gia, your attendant, seems nervous. She fumbles your hair comb and avoids your eyes. When you ask her what's wrong, she simply says, "You've been reassigned." Her voice trembles on the last word like it's too sharp to hold barehanded. You pause. Not demoted, not punished, just moved. Again. This time it's the lotus wing. A lovely name. All wings have lovely names. But among the inner court, the lotus wing is whispered about the way people whisper about a woman who smiles too widely at a funeral. It's beautiful but distant. Peaceful but forgotten. Quiet but in a suffocating kind of way. You ask no questions. You nod. You pack the few items you're allowed to keep. The brush gifted by your poetry instructor. The sash embroidered with twin cranes. The dried plum blossom now pressed between the pages of your only book. You leave behind the robe that smells of rosewater. You leave behind the idea that you still mattered. The walk to the lotus wing is long and silent. The guards don't speak to you. Gia follows 2 steps behind. You pass through 3 arched corridors, each more faded than the last, until the palace begins to feel like a painting left too long in the sun. When you arrive, there are no greetings. Just a room prepared larger technically than your old one, but devoid of warmth. No flower arrangements, no calligraphy scrolls, just space and dust. Historians still debate whether wings like the lotus were used for rest, reflection, or quiet punishment. Some records suggest they were for convalescence. Others claim they were subtle holding cells for women whose presence had become inconvenient. Either way, no one stays there by choice. You settle in quickly. What else can you do? Your new attendant, an older woman named Anne, brings you ginger tea and speaks only when spoken to. You don't ask why Gia didn't come with you. You don't want to know the answer. The first week passes in a haze of gray afternoons and overly polite silences. Your meals arrive on time, but the portions are smaller. You're permitted daily walks in the adjoining garden, but only under supervision. You're no longer required at poetry gatherings nor embroidery sessions. You receive no scrolls, no notes, only silence. The garden itself is strange, beautiful in a forgotten sort of way. Stone lanterns smothered in moss. A koi pond that hasn't been cleaned in months. Lotus flowers that bloom and die without anyone watching. You begin naming them just to feel less invisible. That one is white fan. The next, plum pulse. The smallest one barely blooming you call quiet fortune. You talk to them more than you talk to people now. On the 10th day, you spot Mei Lin from a distance. She's in another courtyard, trailing behind a consort of the second rank. She doesn't see you, or if she does, she gives no sign. Later that night, you receive a bowl of sesame dumplings still warm. A small note is hidden under the bowl. The koi swim even when no one watches. You fold the note into the lining of your robe and say nothing. Time blurs in the lotus wing. Your only duties now are self-maintenance. You wake, you dress, you present yourself each morning at roll call. You pretend to read. You take slow, quiet walks. You sit at the edge of the pond and think about nothing until something drips into your mind, usually a poem, sometimes just a color. You once thought peace would be a comfort, but this peace feels like wool wrapped over your ears. One evening as you light your incense and hesitates behind you. Many women grow old here. She says, her voice low and distant. They don't notice until it's already happened. You glance at her. She looks out the window. The lantern light catches the fine silver strands in her braid. How long have you been here, you ask? She shrugs. Long enough to know when someone has been moved, not placed. You thank her. She says nothing more for the rest of the night. The next morning, a pale lotus petal floats into your lap while you sit by the water. You don't know where it came from. There's no breeze. You press it into your book next to the plum blossom and wonder how long it will take before this wing begins to feel like home. Or worse, before it does, you stop counting days. At first, you kept track with notches carved discreetly into the underside of your dressing bench, one for each sunrise spent in the lotus wing. It was a little ritual, something to make time feel tangible. But eventually, the lines began to blur together, and you no longer remember which notch was the first or the 50th. You adapt. You always adapt. The lotus wing teaches you a different kind of stillness. It's not like the earlier court stillness, performative, watchful humming with the tension of possibility. This stillness is thicker, more internal. It hums too, but the tune is older and slower, and only for you. Your body slows. Your mind slows. The pace becomes the point. The staff change again. Your meals are now delivered by a mute girl who wears no hair ornaments and never makes eye contact. You call her Swan, though you don't know her name. One day she leaves a peach on your windowsill without explanation. It's the sweetest thing you've tasted in months. You try to write again. A few verses. A memory. Even just a list of colors you haven't seen in a while. But the brush slips and the words feel too loud for the silence that surrounds you. You don't try again the next day. Historians still argue whether older concubines in the palace retained influence or were merely contained. Some sources describe them as honored elders, sources of wisdom and guidance. Others, more blunt, describe them as ghosts given lodging. You're not sure which you're becoming. You see fewer faces now. An official visits once a month to update the residency scroll. He bows politely, asks no questions, and leaves a new scroll behind. You read it alone. Most names are unfamiliar. Some you dimly recall girls you once passed in the hallway, now elevated, reassigned, or simply no longer listed. You find no mention of Maylene. Her absence sits on your lap for an hour after the scroll is gone. You've begun talking to the koi again, not with expectation, just habit. You name a new one every week, whisper your thoughts like offerings. Sometimes they surface near your hand mouths, opening and closing as if in reply. You tell them stories, not real ones, just fragments. You pretend they understand. It's easier that way. One morning, the Empress's steward arrives. You haven't seen someone of his rank in nearly a year. He bows, formally says nothing beyond a rote pleasantry, and delivers a package wrapped in yellow silk. Inside is a hair comb, jade carved into twin phoenixes. No note, no explanation. It's not a gift. Not really. It's a gesture. You used to crave gestures like this. Now it feels like someone left a poem at your grave. You place the comb on your dressing bench and don't touch it for 3 days. Eventually you wear it. Just once. Just to remember what it feels like. Later, when you remove it, you place it back in the box as if it might crawl away on its own if left out too long. You begin taking walks at night. Not forbidden exactly, but definitely not encouraged. The guards know you. They nod and look the other way. You suspect they've been instructed to let you wander as long as you don't wander too far. The palace looks different at night. Less golden, more silver. Less opulent, more haunted. The walls murmur with breeze. The halls are empty in a way that makes even your slippers sound impolite. You pause sometimes at the outer edges of the Empress's garden, not to spy, just to feel a different air. You see lanterns still lit in the higher wings, laughter faint and distant. The world continues spinning, without you. And yet you do not disappear. You wake each morning. You wash. You bow. You recite verses under your breath. You greet Swan with a nod. You comb your hair whether or not anyone sees it. You still exist. One afternoon, and the older attendant brings you a folded piece of plum-dyed cloth. A festival gift, she says simply. You unfold it to find a shawl stitched with clouds and cranes, delicate like a sigh you can wear. There's no festival, not in the lotus wing, but you wear it anyway. That night by the pond, you recite an old line from memory. Even in still waters, the moon leaves a ripple. And for once, the koi don't stir. The scrolls stop coming. No fanfare, no explanation, just an absence where something used to be. You only realize it when you catch yourself waiting near the doorway one morning, half expecting the steward's soft footsteps, the rustle of silk-wrapped parchment. But the corridor stays empty. You wait a while longer, then slowly close the door. Nothing has been said. That's how things are done here. Officially, you're still noble lady of the 5th rank. Unofficially, you are something else now. Not disgraced, not erased, just unrecorded. You are no longer part of the rotation. You don't react outwardly. You nod through your morning rituals. You drink your tea. You adjust your robe. But somewhere deep inside, something very small quietly lays down. Historians rarely write about this stage. The records focus on elevation scandal drama. No one documents what it's like to vanish administratively. You're not removed, you're just no longer maintained. Like a painting that stays on the wall but no longer gets dusted. You're still visited once a week by a physician. Not the young one from before, but a new man with a sleepy voice and soft eyes. He takes your pulse and asks no questions. You offer no details. It's a dance of mutual disinterest. Your world shrinks further. The lotus garden becomes your entire empire. You know every crooked stepping stone, every vine that wraps itself around the old gazebo pillars. You begin to recognize the koi by their swimming patterns. You name one old general because he always circles twice before surfacing. Another plumtail for the reddish tip of her fin. Sometimes you speak aloud softly just to break the silence, not to anyone in particular, to the air, the leaves, the past. Once you say your old name, it sounds strange in your mouth, like tasting something from a dream you don't fully remember, and begins humming while she works. She never did before. You wonder if she's trying to keep you tethered to the moment or herself. One day, Swan brings you a package, unlabeled, wrapped in worn silk. Inside, dried chrysanthemum blossoms and a folded poem you wrote long ago, copied in another hand. The moon rises even when no one's watching. No signature, but you recognize the careful curve of the brush strokes. Mei Lin. You say nothing but keep the note pressed between your fingers for an hour. After that, it lives under your pillow. That night, you dream of corridors that don't end and windows that open into sky. The palace continues on without you. You hear stories secondhand, so-and-so promoted a new consort, rising a scandal in the embroidery wing. None of it touches you. Not anymore. You are a moonlit shadow behind the main lantern. There's a phrase the older women used to say, the less they remember, the longer you last. Now you understand. Still, your robe is always clean, your hair always brushed. You kneel at morning call, even if no one checks. You recite verses beneath your breath so your tongue doesn't forget the rhythm of formality. Then one day, a strange thing happens. You're summoned. Not to the emperor, not to the empress, but to the Hall of Harmony where old records are kept. Your escort is silent, unfamiliar. Your steps echo through corridors you haven't walked in years. You barely recognize the reflection in the lacquered screens. You're told to sign a scroll, a reclassification. Dormant lady, it reads. Not a demotion, not exactly. More like a category made to explain what you've become. They say the term is new, created for women like you. Women who are neither favored nor forgotten. Still present, but not part of anything. You dip your brush, sign your name with care. They thank you. You are escorted back in silence. Later, An sets an extra cushion by the window. I thought you might like a new place to read, she says. You thank her. You sit. You look out at the garden where nothing ever seems to happen, and everything quietly grows. In the fading light, the pond catches the sky. You wonder if anyone else sees it. You no longer dream in color. Or maybe you do, but the colors feel muted, like faded ink on silk. Most nights your sleep is shallow, a tide that never quite reaches shore. You wake often not from noise, but from habit. The palace trained you that way. Soft footsteps silk rustle the faintest cough in the distance. Your body still registers them as signals to rise, to smile, to kneel, to perform. Except now, no one comes. There are days when you don't speak at all, and when you do, it's mostly to the koi. You speak of weather, of poetry, of dreams where you remember your mother's voice. You recite lines from the Book of Odes just to hear the rhythm of something older than the walls. Even the koi seem to listen. Swan brings you food like clockwork. Sometimes she adds a plum or a candied walnut to the tray. Sometimes she forgets the chopsticks. You don't mind. These things happen. Time is soft here, like oversteeped tea, and now calls you elder sister when she's in a good mood. You're not sure if it's affection or pity, but it doesn't matter. You smile either way. You've learned that resistance can take many forms. Not all of them are loud. Some are quiet refusals to rot. You still rise early, still comb your hair, still select your robe as if you might be called to court. The difference is now you know you won't be, and you do it anyway. Historians rarely name women like you. They record the empresses, the favorites, the scandals. But you're a footnote if you're lucky, a number in a registry, a suggestion in a lineage scroll. Maybe your hair comb survives. Maybe a servant remembers your nickname, but more likely you fade. You've accepted this mostly, and still there are moments that shimmer, like today. You're in the garden arranging pebbles beside the pond when you feel the warmth of the sun hit your shoulder in just the right way. The koi swim lazily, their mouths breaking the surface like whispers. Somewhere a breeze stirs the wind chime that hasn't moved in weeks. And you feel something. Not joy exactly, but something tender. You remember the first time you bowed in silk. The first time you recited a poem in the presence of an official. The way your hands trembled. The dreams you dared to have. They weren't foolish, just unfinished. You think of Mei Lin, of the note she sent, of the others who must live like you now in other wings, in other silent rooms. A whole invisible constellation of women orbiting the same empty throne. And yet here you are, still breathing, still folding your robes, still feeding fish. One morning, Swan brings a scroll. You haven't seen one in a year. It's a ceremonial copy of the seasonal registry. You scan it slowly. Names blur together. But there at the bottom is yours. Dormant lady, lotus wing, no longer erased, simply present. You place the scroll beneath your mattress, not out of fear, but ritual. That night you walk the garden paths slowly. You pause beneath the plum tree now bare. You tilt your head toward the stars and recite one final poem barely above a whisper. Even when unseen, the moon is whole. And for once, you feel it. A fullness not of importance, but of being. You are not remembered. You are not restored. You are not redeemed. But you are still here. And sometimes that's enough. And now, as the palace fades and the last lanterns dim behind those silent stone walls, your breathing slows. The koi have stopped circling. The garden is still. The wind no longer rustles the paper blinds. Everything is still and hushed and waiting. You're resting now, not just in body, but in mind. No more steps to trace, no more names to recall, no more watchers behind curtains. Just the steady rhythm of breath and the gentle warmth of a blanket, and the quiet knowledge that you endured. That your story, though small, though silent, mattered. The walls of the lotus wing fall away. The sky opens wide above you, full of stars that don't need names. The wind chimes whisper your favorite poem. The moon returns soft and full, and you watch its glow wash over every shadowed stone and forgotten corner of the garden. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels lighter. You're allowed to let go now. Let your thoughts drift like petals in the water. Let your body settle deeper into the mattress. Let your fingers relax, your jaw unhinge slightly. Your eyelids flutter low. Let the palace continue without you. You've done more than enough. And so tonight, here in this quiet world of silk and stillness and soft breathing, you sleep. The terrible work that medieval farmers had to do. Before sunrise, we're going back to a time when your morning alarm wasn't a cheerful chime on your phone. It was the biting cold of your own breath hanging in the air above your straw mattress. You're not sleeping in a cozy bed or even on a mattress, really. You're curled up on a sack of flattened straw that smells faintly of goat and mold. The air inside the cottage is so cold it almost feels wet. It's pitch dark, and the only light comes from the embers in the hearth glowing faintly red beneath a pile of ash. And yes, your toes are numb. Outside, the roosters haven't even thought about crowing. But you're already late. You pull the itchy wool blanket off your shoulders and immediately regret it. The cold air hits your face like a slap. Your knees crack as you stand, and your feet land on the frozen dirt floor with a silent curse. Your joints ache not because you're old, but because you sleep curled like a pretzel every night after 12 hours in the fields. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really had it that bad. But you're pretty sure they never had to get up before dawn with a full day of misery ahead of them. Your breath clouds in front of you as you tiptoe around your snoring siblings, your snoring parents, and yep, that one chicken that somehow ended up inside again. You find your rough tunic hanging near the hearth, stiff with yesterday's sweat. You slide it on like armor. It smells like every terrible decision you've made this week. The cottage is one room, just one. Everyone sleeps here, eats here, breathes here. And awkwardly sometimes uses the chamber pot here too. You glance at the bucket in the corner and give it a wide berth. You shove open the crooked wooden door with your shoulder. It groans louder than your knees did. Outside, the world is damp and black. No moon, no stars, just the heavy smell of wet hay and manure in the wind. You step outside and immediately sink an inch into mud. Your toes curl instinctively, though that does very little when you're barefoot. Everything is still. No birds, no breeze, just the quiet of a village not yet stirring. You're the first soul awake. Congratulations, you win nothing. There's a tiny thrill to that moment, even in the cold. It's like holding a secret the world hasn't remembered yet. You have about 20 minutes before anyone else stirs and about 20 chores to do. First, you need to get the fire going again, but more on that in the next section. Before that, let's take one last look around. This little hovel you live in isn't uncommon. Most medieval peasants had homes just like this. Wattle and daub walls, a thatched roof patched with turf, and not a single inch of insulation. Fun fact. Some roofs were so poorly sealed that birds nested in them. One chronicler from 1294 wrote about being shat upon thrice in the night by nesting sparrows. Charming. You scratch your head, which doesn't help the lice situation, and step into your morning. There is no coffee. There is no sunlight. There is only duty and frozen toes. You shuffle toward the animal pen with the same enthusiasm as a condemned man heading to the gallows. The mud sucks at your feet with each step, cold and clinging like a toddler with separation anxiety. The path to the pen is familiar. You could walk it blindfolded, but that doesn't make it any less miserable. Even the chickens aren't up yet. You think you hear one snore. Your first job, feed the animals. Technically, it's not your job alone, but you're the one who drew the short straw last night. Or rather, the other straws mysteriously disappeared after everyone accidentally forgot they had hands. The pigsty hits your nose before your eyes can even adjust to the gloom. That thick, sweet, sour stench of mud waste and pig breath practically punches you. The pigs are already awake, snorting expectantly in the dark. They shuffle over to the gate as you unlatch it, their hooves squelching in muck that's more than just dirt. Here's your task: shovel slop from a bucket, an unspeakable stew of vegetable peels, stale bread, and unidentifiable goo into the trough without spilling it on yourself. You fail. The bucket slips. Some of it splashes onto your shin, warm and sticky and probably fermented. That's going to linger. You mutter something medievally unfriendly and keep going. The pigs don't care. They're too busy diving face first into the trough like nobles at a feast. Next stop, the chicken roost. Chickens you'd think would be easier. They are not. They are jittery territorial feather bullets with beady eyes and vendettas. One particular hen, Martha, is already awake, perched like a demon on the edge of the roost. You know she's going to attack, and yet you still hope today will be different. It isn't. As you reach into the coop to check for eggs, Martha flaps directly into your face. Feathers, screaming, claw to the ear. You yank your hand back and stumble onto your behind in the straw. Dignity 0. Egg count 1, slightly cracked. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants viewed chickens as prized food sources or miniature devils in disguise. You are firmly in the latter camp. Once the coop is handled, eggs collected, feed scattered, Martha glared at you, moved to the goat shed. You hate the goats. Goats are chaos incarnate. One is already chewing on the corner of the door. Another tries to nibble your tunic as you step inside. You push it gently away, and it retaliates by headbutting your knee. Classic. But feeding them is simple hay and a bucket of water. Easy if you don't count the goat that follows you out and nearly knocks over the bucket. Again, there's something quietly absurd about all this. While the noblemen dream in feather beds about hunting and courtly dances, you're elbow deep in animal waste before the first hint of dawn. And yet this routine, this smelly, cold, humiliating routine, is the backbone of the entire medieval economy. No pigs, no pork, no chickens, no eggs, no goats, no cheese, and frankly, no fun. You pause for a moment on a wooden stump, wiping your hands on your tunic, because what else is there to wipe them on, and glance at the sky. It's still black, but there's a hint of lighter gray near the horizon. Not sunrise. Not yet. Just the slow tease of it. You take a deep breath. It smells like manure and frost and something faintly burning. Probably the neighbor's chimney. Or possibly their dinner from last night still smoldering. You never asked. By this point, your fingers are tingling with cold and your stomach growls. But breakfast is still a dream. First, you need to start the fire. And given the state of your kindling, that's going to be its own mini ordeal. Still, before you trudge back to the house, you do a final check. pigs eating, chickens slightly murderous, goats loud. Mission accomplished. You turn back toward the house, feet squelching in the mud, and try not to think about the fact that you'll be doing this all over again tomorrow, and the next day, and probably for the rest of your life. But hey, at least it keeps you warm. Back inside the cottage, your nose instantly picks up the faint scent of last night's ashes, a blend of scorched oats, old wood, and that unmistakable smoky note of "this is all we've got." The hearth looks more like a grave than a fire, just a few tired embers hiding beneath a pale blanket of ash glowing weakly, as if they're not sure they want to be here either. Time to start the fire. Again, you kneel beside the hearth and reach for the kindling basket. It's mostly damp twigs you gathered days ago, half of them chewed on by something with small judgmental teeth. There's one precious piece of dried birch bark buried near the bottom, but you're saving that for a true emergency, like when the Lord visits or it rains indoors again. You stack the twigs into a little pyramid, muttering encouragement like you're coaching a skittish cat. Then you reach for the flint and steel. If you're lucky, it'll take 6 strikes. If you're unlucky, it'll take 47 and a small personal sacrifice. The sparks come grudgingly, like they're being charged interest. One catches briefly. You blow gently. It fizzles out. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants developed special tricks for fire-starting bits of moss soaked in animal fat, tightly bundled lint from woven cloth, even dried dung. You try the dung. It lights better than expected. Smells like regret, but it works. After a few tense minutes and a lot of muttered threats, the twigs catch. The fire stirs awake like a cranky old man. You feed it gently, cooing like it's a baby, or the village gossip. A few thicker sticks go on top, and slowly warmth begins to creep back into the room. The fire isn't just for cooking or comfort, it's a living necessity. Without it, the cottage becomes an icebox. Without it, there's no porridge, no boiled water, no hot air to dry your soaked boots. You glance over at them by the way they're still wet from yesterday's storm, and they still leak. As the flames grow, they cast flickering shadows across the low ceiling. Smoke curls lazily upward toward the roof hole, and you try not to think about the fact that it's probably clogged again. That'll be another chore for someone else. Hopefully. The warmth slowly reaches your fingers, your knees, your cheeks. You feel them again, unfortunately. With the fire going, you move to the next task, lighting the rest of the house. There aren't candles, not proper ones anyway. Those are for churches and rich people. You have a sliver of tallow set in a cracked clay dish, essentially beef fat pretending to be a lighting system. It smells terrible and burns unevenly, but you light it from the hearth and place it on the shelf. One corner of the room glows faintly, just enough for you to see the other corner in complete darkness. The light reveals a few of your tools scattered where you left them yesterday. A cracked wooden bowl, a half-repaired rake, a sock that may or may not belong to someone who still lives here. It also reveals your brother still snoring into the straw with the peaceful expression of someone who didn't have to light a fire this morning. You consider throwing a twig at him. You don't. Growth. Instead, you step outside again, this time to check the fuel pile. You're low. Always low. Most of what's left is brushwood and damp bundles that hiss more than they burn. You gather an armful anyway, dragging it back inside as your tunic absorbs yet another layer of moisture from the morning fog. One last glance at the fire. It's alive. Barely. That's enough. There's a comfort in the fire's crackle. It anchors the chaos of morning animals fed frost-bitten fingers burned, but now, fire. It means tea. It means gruel. It means you made it through the first hour of being awake without collapsing. And somewhere not far from here, a nobleman is also waking up. He will stretch luxuriously in a feather bed, ring a little bell, and be served breakfast on silver. You meanwhile just warmed your hands with a burning stick. Different worlds. Same sunrise. The fire is crackling now, still temperamental, but it's holding. Time for the next delightful part of your morning routine. Hauling water. Because what is life really without lugging sloshing wooden buckets through ankle-deep muck while your back pretends it's already 60? There's no well in the house. Of course not. That luxury is reserved for castles, monasteries, and fairy tales. Your water source is a small pit halfway between the cottage and the woods. It's technically a spring, but most people just call it the hole. You grab the bucket. It's heavy even when empty. One of the wooden slats is loose and the handle creaks like it's rehearsing for a tragedy. You trudge outside again, this time past the goat pen, where one particularly bold goat watches you with an unsettling level of judgment. The path to the water hole is a slip and slide of mud, frost, and rocks that seem determined to stub your toes. No lantern, no moon, just the creeping light of pre-dawn doing its best impression of useful illumination. You keep your head low and your balance lower. When you reach the water hole, it greets you like a rude cousin, familiar, unkempt, and probably full of frogs. You crouch and lean over the edge, bracing yourself on a half-rotted log that was placed there generations ago and hasn't been replaced since. You lower the bucket in slowly. The rope creaks. The bucket hits the water with a hollow splash. You wiggle it around until it fills, then hoist it back up. It's heavier now, obviously, and the rope frayed. Just enough to make every lift feel like a gamble. Historians still argue whether most peasants had communal wells or individual springs. Some even debate if hauling water was a task shared equally among family members or dumped on the youngest. Judging by your current situation, the latter seems likely. You pour the first bucket into a clay jug near the hearth. This is for drinking and cooking. Then you go back out for more, this time for washing. The term washing, of course, is generous. It involves splashing lukewarm water on your face and maybe wiping your hands on a rag that hasn't been clean since last summer. Trip 2 to the water hole is less charming. Your arms are tired and your feet are soaked again. A passing breeze cuts through your damp tunic and delivers a cold slap directly to your spine. Somewhere during the return walk, you consider what it would be like to invent indoor plumbing. You'd be hailed as a wizard, a revolutionary, possibly burned for heresy. But you'd never have to carry water again. As you approach the cottage, you see that the fire is holding steady. The tallow candle still flickers, casting jittery shadows on the walls. You pour the second bucket into a wooden basin and glance at your reflection just long enough to confirm that yes, you do still look like a peasant who hasn't slept or bathed properly in weeks. Before anyone else stirs, you take a moment to wash your face. The water is freezing. Your cheeks tighten, your eyes water, and you gasp like someone dunked your head into a snowbank. Congratulations, you're awake now. You pat yourself dry with a square of rough linen that could also be described as exfoliating if you're being optimistic. One of the chickens has wandered into the doorway, peering at you like you're the weird one. And then just as you sit down, just as you take a deep breath, just as you feel the tiniest spark of peace, you hear it. The unmistakable sound of someone emptying the chamber pot. Loudly. Right behind you. So much for serenity. Still the water's in. The fire's lit. The animals are fed. You've been pecked and salted by goats, doused in slop, and frozen by the wind. And yet somehow you've accomplished more before sunrise than a modern person might manage before noon. Of course, you still have to milk the cow. But that's for the next section. Time to face the cow. You've been putting it off, hoping maybe, just maybe, today would be the day someone else volunteered. But no, it's your turn. Again. And the cow knows it. You step out into the misty gray of early dawn. The sky has softened from black to a dull ash blue, and a couple of birds are starting to chirp, either from joy or desperation. Probably both. You trudge through the muck to the rickety lean-to that serves as a barn. It smells strongly of old straw, wet fur, and something deeper, richer, an aroma you politely identify as very concentrated cow. The cow is already awake, standing there like a large judgmental statue. Her name is probably something pleasant like Buttercup, but in your mind she is Lady Hoofstrike. Because every time you milk her, she manages to step on your foot, swat your face with her tail, or shift her weight in just the wrong direction. You swear she times it. You fetch the stool, wobbly, splintered, held together by a prayer and some twine, and the old tin pail. You approach slowly like a knight confronting a dragon, except you're barefoot and holding a bucket. You settle in beside her, gently patting her flank. She turns her head and gives you a look. The kind of look a cow reserves for the one person in the village she truly disrespects. You sigh and get to work. You reach under, wrap your fingers around the teats, and start the rhythm squeeze-release. Squeeze-release. A thin stream hits the bottom of the pail with a metallic ping, then another, then another. It's almost musical in a way, if you ignore the flies, and the smell, and the slowly building tension in your forearms. Historians still argue how much milk a peasant household could realistically produce from a single cow, especially one on a sparse diet and overworked frame. Some suggest half a gallon a day, while others claim more, especially in summer. Right now, you're just trying to not spill the quarter pint you've managed to collect. Lady Hoofstrike shifts. You freeze. You've been here before. She's debating whether to move her leg. She does. Right onto your foot. You bite your tongue. Hard. You close your eyes. You breathe through the pain. You may never walk again, but at least the milk didn't spill. Yet. You finish milking painfully slowly with multiple tail slaps to the face. Your hair now contains something that definitely isn't shampoo. You stand, flex your foot, and back away with the pail like it's an ancient artifact that will self-destruct if tilted. You pour the milk into a covered jug back at the cottage, setting it aside for later boiling. No one drinks raw milk. Not because they know about bacteria, but because cows eat literally everything, and the result tastes like it. Also, it's safer barely. And just when you think you're done, you remember there's still the calf. You need to check it, feed it if needed. and ensure it hasn't somehow escaped again. Last time it wandered into the neighbor's garden and trampled all the turnips. You're still hearing about it. You peek into the side pen, and there it is, curled up, snoring gently. You sneak in some fresh straw, refill its tiny bucket with milk-soaked mash, and gently pat its head. It licks your hand with a rough, sticky tongue. A rare moment of affection in a morning filled with nothing but resistance. You trudge back toward the house again, wiping your hands on a rag that used to be white. You're covered in everything slop, mud, hay, resentment, and it's not even proper morning yet. The sky has finally lightened into a dusty pink. The world is waking up. You've already been up for hours. You glance over at the neighbor's cottage. Smoke's just now curling from the chimney. Late risers. Probably nobles. You step into your own cottage and set the milk jug beside the hearth. The fire's still going, the water's still warm, and your brother is still pretending to be asleep. You throw a pebble at his blanket. Just one, for justice. You barely have time to stretch the ache from your shoulders before moving on to your next delight slop duty. Ah yes, feeding the pigs and chickens was only the first course. Now comes the main dish, preparing the actual slop, not the edible kind. No. This is the special recipe made from everyone else's leftovers, moldy ends, and fermented kitchen shame. You are essentially the head chef of medieval garbage. You retrieve the slop bucket from the back corner of the room. It's wooden stained and somehow always moist, even when it shouldn't be. You don't question it. You don't want to know. The contents are a layered mystery of porridge crusts, cabbage trimmings, onion ends, bread heels, a suspicious puddle, and one limp carrot that's been through a lot. The top has begun to bubble slightly, which you take as a sign that the fermentation is working, or that you've accidentally created medieval moonshine. You grab a wooden paddle and stir the contents slowly. A sour steam rises and invades your nostrils with the urgency of 1,000 wrong decisions. You gag, just a little, every single time. Historians still argue about the exact composition of medieval animal slop. Some say it was anything short of poisonous. Others believe certain herbs were deliberately added to improve digestion or mask the smell. You find that hard to believe. No herb known to man could rescue this. Once stirred, you divide the slop into smaller pails, one for the pigs, one for the chickens, and a tiny one for that one goat that thinks it's a nobleman. You carry the first pail outside, careful not to spill it. The pigs greet you like you're a returning war hero. They squeal, crowd, and shove each other as you pour the steaming mess into their trough. One of them sneezes directly onto your leg. You nod solemnly as if that were a blessing. The chickens are next. They don't get as much, just a bit poured near the coop. They peck at it suspiciously as if conducting a taste test for a food blog. Martha, your sworn enemy, glares at you again. She seems offended by your culinary choices. Finally, the goat. You approach with caution. He trots up like he owns the land, sniffs the pail, and of course, knocks it over before taking a bite. He then climbs on top of the empty bucket and bleats triumphantly. You clap slowly. Truly a performance. You return to the house to rinse the pails, which really means sloshing some water into them and swirling it around with a stick. The pails don't get clean exactly. They just get less chunky. There's still a faint chill in the air, but the sun has begun to stretch pale gold fingers across the landscape. You pause for a moment to admire it. The thatched rooftops catching light, the frost melting into glistening rivulets on the grass, the unmistakable silhouette of someone already yelling at a cow down the lane. Peaceful. You step back into the cottage, hands sticky and stomach beginning to rumble. You'll need to prep breakfast soon, but before that, more chores. Always more chores. Still, there's something oddly satisfying about this part of the morning. The fire crackles steadily. The smell of manure has faded into the background. You're halfway through your list and no bones are broken. You glance at the corner of the room where the slop bucket usually lives. Empty. Cleanish. Mission complete. The irony of spending this much time preparing food you wouldn't dare eat is not lost on you. But pigs are wealth, chickens are status, and even goats arrogant little monsters. They are provide milk, cheese, and company. In a world without savings, accounts they are the bank. Your hands smell like turnip rot and spoiled onion, but your heart slightly proud. Slightly. Don't get emotional about it. You wipe your hands on your tunic again, because what else is there, and look toward the fire. Breakfast's next. But not for you. First, you've got to cook for everyone else. You'd think that after feeding all the animals, preparing the slop, and nearly losing a toe to a cow, you might earn a moment of rest. But no. Because now it's time to deal with what might be the single most dreaded job of the morning, scooping human waste for fertilizer. Yes, that's right, night soil. The term is oddly poetic, but don't let it fool you. What you're about to do is less poetry and more personal horror. And unfortunately, it's your week on the rota. You grab the waste shovel from behind the door, its wooden handle worn smooth by generations of suffering, and the slop cart's slightly smaller cousin, the chamber pot cart. It's really just a wheelbarrow with a cracked wheel and a destiny no one envies. You head around to the side of the house where last night's chamber pots have been carefully lined up like soldiers awaiting deployment. Each one full. Each one fragrant. Most medieval cottages didn't have indoor toilets. When nature called, you went into a pot and hoped no one bumped into you in the dark. Come morning, someone had to take that collection and move it outside to the compost heap or to the fields. Congratulations. That someone is you. You breathe through your mouth. You try not to think. You gently pour the contents into the waste cart. Some splashes. It always splashes. You look up at the sky as if begging for divine intervention. None comes. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants fully understood the sanitary risks of using human waste in agriculture. Some evidence suggests that composting methods neutralized many dangers over time, but plenty of people probably fell ill from exposure. You try not to dwell on that as you wipe your hands with hay. With the cart loaded, you wheel it out to the manure pile at the far end of the property. It's steaming slightly in the cold. A sure sign it's active, as the village elders say. You add your morning's gift to the heap and poke at it with the shovel to help it settle. The smell is transcendent, not in a good way. It's quiet out here, at least. Just the wind, the occasional grunt from a pig in the distance, and the soft squelch of your boots in the mud. You pause for a moment, leaning on the shovel, and admire the distant hills bathed in the pale gold of early morning light. There's something weirdly beautiful about it, this quiet, stinky corner of your world. You remember a story once told by old Marna, the village herbalist, about a noble woman who refused to let her servants use human waste on her garden, said it offended her delicate senses. Her roses died within a season. The moral was clear beauty doesn't bloom without a bit of muck. You trudge back to the house, dragging the empty cart behind you. Your arms are sore, your back is sore, and your pride is nowhere to be found. But the job is done. The village compost is just a little richer today, thanks to you and your dedication to truly unpleasant responsibilities. You park the cart beside the tool shed and hose it down with a bit of leftover bucket water. By hose, of course, you mean splash aggressively and hope for the best. You glance down at yourself. There's a streak across your tunic. It could be mud. You choose to believe it's mud. Back inside, the fire is still alive. The house smells like smoke and straw and a faint trace of breakfast starting to bubble in someone else's pot. You wipe your hands again and take a deep breath. Next up, fixing the tools that broke yesterday. Because naturally the shovel handle cracked, the rake lost a tooth, and the bucket you used this morning is leaking again. Just another beautiful morning in the life of a medieval peasant. The tools are waiting for you, like cranky old relatives scattered wounded and vaguely disappointed in you. You spot the broken rake first, its wooden tooth snapped clean in half and hanging on by a splinter. Nearby, the cracked bucket sulks in the corner, slowly dripping water onto the floor. And over by the hearth, the shovel leans like it's suffered a mortal wound. All of them demand your attention before sunrise. You settle onto the bench by the window, the one spot in the house that gets decent light when the sun finally rises. Right now, it's barely more than a gray smudge on the horizon. So you light the stub of the tallow candle again. The smell of half-melted beef fat fills the room. Ambiance. You lay out your tiny repair kit, a few wooden pegs, some coarse twine, a rusted nail or two, and the same dull knife everyone uses for everything from carving spoons to trimming toenails. This is your toolbox. This is your kingdom. First, the rake. You test the loose tooth, then yank it out with a satisfying crack. You whittle a replacement from a bit of kindling far too soft, but it'll hold for a day or two. You wedge it into place and tie it tight with twine. It's crooked, but then again, so is everything else in your life. Next, the bucket. It's made from wooden staves bound by a single metal hoop that's been loosening since you were 10. You pry out the worst stave, shave it flat, and wedge in a patch. You seal the gaps with beeswax scraped from last year's candle ends. You tested mud once, don't ask. Historians still argue about the average repair skills of medieval peasants. Some say tools were constantly falling apart and barely patched together. Others believe rural folk had an incredible understanding of woodwork metal and improvisation born from necessity. Judging by your handiwork, you fall somewhere in the middle, stubborn and hopeful. The shovel is next. The handle has split slightly at the base, which makes it feel like it could snap mid-use and catapult you into a pig trough. Again. You bind it tight with twine and wedge it between two stones to hold its shape while it sets. Good enough for now. By the time you're finished, your fingers are sticky with wax and dirt, and the candle's nearly melted to a puddle. You blow it out with a puff that sends the room back into a gentle ember-lit haze. The tools are lined up neatly by the door. You stand back and admire them like a craftsman, which in this light you almost are. There's something quietly fulfilling about this work. No one will thank you. The tools will still break again next week. But for now, they're whole, useful, ready. You stretch your arms over your head, back cracking like dry twigs. The cottage creaks around you as others begin to stir blankets, shifting a groggy cough, someone muttering about a dream involving goats and dancing. Normal stuff. You glance over at the fire. Still burning. Steady. It's doing better than you are. Before the others rise, you step outside for a breath of air. The frost is melting now, the ground a little softer, the light gold and pink across the fields. The village is slowly awakening. Smoke rising from chimneys, a distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. A rooster finally remembering to crow. Your breath mists in the morning air. You flex your fingers. Your muscles ache, but your tasks are done. At least for the moment. There's grain to grind next. Of course there is. But right now, for one fleeting second, you allow yourself the luxury of doing nothing. Just leaning against the doorway, watching the steam rise from the muck and appreciating that at least the tools won't betray you today. Probably. You head back inside and glance over at the quern stone, the squat, heavy device that lives in the corner of the room like some ancient pet. It's made of two thick, circular stones stacked one atop the other with a wooden handle sticking out the side like an afterthought. It's the reason your shoulders are always sore, your wrists always stiff, and your patience always wearing thin. Time to grind the grain. You kneel beside the quern and reach for the coarse sack of barley, scooping a couple of handfuls into the hopper. The grains are rough, dusty, and slightly sticky from the damp. You insert the wooden peg into the top stone, give it a half-hearted tug, and the grinding begins. Round and round, and round, and round. The sound is a low grumble, like an old man muttering in his sleep. The motion tedious, meditative, maddening. Your arms move in slow, steady circles, pushing the top stone to crush the grains into something vaguely resembling flour. Historians agree that hand-grinding grain was one of the most time-consuming and exhausting tasks in a peasant's daily life. In fact, some scholars believe women spend up to 4 hours a day just grinding grain for bread porridge and animal feed. You're lucky if it only takes an hour. Your quern has a chip in the side that throws off the rhythm and makes every 5th rotation a clunky jolt. As the flour trickles out the side, it forms a pale, gritty pile. It smells faintly sweet, like dried hay and effort. You keep going, muscles aching, sweat beginning to bead at your temples despite the morning chill. And while the task is boring, profoundly, bone-deep boring, there's something hypnotic about it. The rhythm. The quiet. The soft scraping of stone on stone. You fall into a kind of trance, your mind drifting as your hands continue the endless loop. You remember that old tale Marna once told, how if you grind counterclockwise, the devil shows up to help. You smirk. At this point, you'd welcome the company. You change hands to give your dominant arm a break. The rhythm falters, then resumes. Outside, you hear a cart rumbling down the road, probably the tanner heading to market. You wonder if he's as tired as you are. The pile of flour grows slowly. You pick out the pebbles, shake out the husks, and keep going. Your fingers are coated in powder, your knuckles stiff. You flex them and press on. By the time you've ground enough for one small loaf and a pot of gruel, your arms feel like they're made of jelly. You sit back, stretching your spine until it pops and exhale slowly. Historians still debate how often peasants had access to communal mills, which were faster, but usually came with fees owed to the local lord. For families like yours, poor, rural, and perpetually in debt, hand grinding at home is the only option. You gather the flour into a cloth tie, it into a pouch, and set it near the hearth. Later, someone else will knead it into dough. Or maybe you will. It depends on who pretends to be asleep fastest. The sun is creeping higher now. Golden light slips through the cracks in the wall, illuminating dust motes that dance lazily through the air. You wipe your hands on your tunic and stand legs trembling slightly. Grinding grain may not be glamorous, but it's life. Every meal begins with this motion. Every loaf of bread comes from this dull, aching labor. In your quiet way, you've built the foundation of the day. You stretch your back once more, crack your knuckles for good measure, and glance toward the fire. Still holding. Barely. Time to give it a poke. After that, you've got another hour of chores before you even think about eating. You grab the fire poker, really just an old iron rod with one slightly curved end, and shuffle over to the hearth. The embers are smoldering lazily, curling smoke and orange glow like they're on break. You jab gently at the woodpile, shifting a charred log into a better position, and toss on a bit more kindling to coax the flames. The fire flickers back to life like a groggy friend reluctantly returning to conversation. You watch it dance for a moment, your fingers briefly soaking in its heat. That's when you remember you're the firekeeper today. In a medieval household, keeping the hearth alive wasn't just about comfort, it was survival. The fire boiled water, cooked food, warmed the room, dried clothes, and served as a vague form of morale. If the fire went out, someone would have to run to the neighbors with a pan and a sheepish expression begging for a borrowed flame. You've done it before. It's humiliating, especially when the neighbor is smug. So you settle in for another duty fire watching. Not glamorous, not physically taxing, but surprisingly stressful. You add a couple of sticks, stir the coals, and wait. And wait. While you're there, you decide to put a small pot of water onto heat. Might as well multitask. It balances on the iron hook above the flames, like it's performing a circus act. You nudge the hook slightly to keep the pot from tipping. You do not want another boiling water on bare feet incident. That was memorable. You sit on the hearth's edge, holding your hands out, and just breathe for a moment. The warmth soaks into your sleeves, your elbows, the raw cold patches behind your knees. You've been up for what feels like a year, and the sun hasn't even crested the treetops. Someone coughs behind you, your father, probably. You hear a sleepy voice ask about breakfast. You pretend not to hear it. You are busy tending the fire, which you now decide requires deep concentration and zero interruptions. Historians often debate how medieval families organized household duties. Some accounts suggest that firekeeping rotated among older children or mothers. Others imply it was simply whoever was awake and unlucky. This morning, it's you. You glance at the pot. Steam curls lazily from its mouth, but it's not boiling yet. You resist the urge to poke it. Patience. The fire's doing well now, so you ease yourself into the role of morning guardian. You take your responsibilities seriously, even if no one else does. You remember a story old Marna once told about a young peasant boy who let the fire go out and had to cross a frozen stream barefoot to get a new ember from a blacksmith's forge. He returned with blisters and a severe lecture from the village priest about eternal flames. You assume it's an exaggeration, but still you keep a close eye on the coals. While you wait, you quietly sweep ashes back from the edge of the hearth. The soot coats your hands, and before long, your face itches. You scratch it without thinking, leaving a nice dark smear across your cheek. The morning fashion look is lightly charred. The pot begins to bubble. Victory. You use a cloth to remove it, carefully pouring the hot water into a wooden basin to warm your siblings' hands when they wake up. You set the pot aside to cool. The smell of rising heat and old soot fills the room, a scent you've come to associate with morning's survival and resilience. As the fire crackles behind you, you realize this small act, tending a flame, is your invisible gift to the household. No one will notice. No one will say thank you. But the fire is here. It didn't go out, and you're the reason. You sit back down for just a moment, letting the fire warm your spine. The outside world is cold, muddy, loud. But here, for a few seconds, there's light. There's heat. There's peace. Of course, you still have to cook. But for now, the fire lives. The fire is steady. The pot has boiled. And now your stomach is staging a quiet protest. It gurgles, then growls, reminding you that you've been awake for hours, and the only thing you've swallowed is your pride. Time to prepare the morning gruel, not for yourself, of course. First comes the rest of the household. You head over to the small table tucked into the corner of the room. There's a bowl of yesterday's flour, a chipped jug of the milk you collected earlier, and a pile of tired root vegetables you keep pretending are still edible. Today's menu: watery oat porridge. Again, you scoop a handful of oats into a blackened iron pot and add a splash of milk, then enough water to make it look vaguely soupy. With the grace of someone who has done this every day since childhood, you hang the pot over the fire and begin to stir. The smell rises slowly, nutty, earthy, slightly burnt around the edges. It's not delicious. It's not even comforting. But it's hot. And hot counts for a lot when the world is made of damp wool and cracked clay. You glance around the room as the others begin to rouse. Your little brother stumbles toward the fire, still tangled in his blanket, blinking like a confused squirrel. Your mother's already up, quietly rearranging jars on a shelf. Someone sneezes loudly in the corner. The day has officially begun. You continue to stir, adding a pinch of salt, a hint of dried onion, and the last shaving of bacon fat scraped from yesterday's pan. It's not enough to change the flavor, but it might trick the brain into thinking this meal had a budget. Historians agree that gruel was a staple of the peasant diet, easy to make, filling and forgiving of poor ingredients. What they don't always emphasize is how repetitive it was. Day after day, the same texture, same heat, same underwhelming mouthfeel. There are moments you would trade your soul for a roasted apple. You ladle the porridge into bowls, uneven wooden ones, some slightly warped from age. The bowls go out in order, elders first, then the smallest children, then the rest. You hold back your own portion until the others have eaten. It's just how things are. As they eat, the room fills with the soft sounds of spoons scraping wood and lips blowing on hot bites. No one speaks much. You all save your words for the fields, for gossip in the afternoons, for prayers mumbled under your breath. Breakfast is a quiet contract. We made it through the night. You finally take a small portion for yourself, scooping it straight from the pot into the bowl that used to belong to your grandmother. The edges are worn smooth from years of use, and there's a tiny crack that you've sealed with wax and hope. The first bite is hot and bland. The second is just bland. The third, well, you stop noticing after that. Hunger takes over. Halfway through your meal, you hear a thud outside. A goose, probably. or a goat escaping again. You sigh deeply and set your bowl down. The porridge is already cooling into a paste. You'll return to it if the goat allows. But for now, you walk to the door and push it open with your hip. Sure enough, the goat is halfway through someone's laundry line, chewing on a sock like it owes him money. You chase him off half-heartedly, waving your arms and muttering threats he's heard before. He trots away smug as always, and you gather the soggy laundry from the ground. Back inside, your family has mostly finished eating. The bowls sit in a neat pile beside the basin, waiting to be rinsed in cold water and dried with the same cloth used for everything. You stack them quietly and return to your seat near the fire. One last spoonful. Cold now, but food nonetheless. It's only mid-morning. You've got more chores ahead. But for a few moments the fire's warm, the room is quiet, and there's a faint sense that despite everything you're doing, okay. As soon as you scrape the last bit of porridge from your bowl, someone mumbles your name and points outside with their chin. Dung duty. You pause. Consider faking an injury. Consider faking a death. Then sigh, stretch your sore shoulders, and shuffle outside once again, because pretending you didn't hear just buys you 5 seconds and a lecture. The barn is already steaming in the morning light, which would be beautiful if it weren't also a pungent reminder of what you're about to do. The sun finally crests the thatched rooftops, turning the damp straw into something that almost sparkles. Almost, but not quite. Not when your job is to muck it all out. You grab the dung fork, a long-handled tool somewhere between a rake and a weapon, and the wheelbarrow, which has one good wheel and one that might fall off if you blink too hard. The smell hits you like a velvet hammer. Warm, sweet, sour, and immediate. You start shoveling. The straw underneath the cows and goats is soaked through. Some of it is still steaming, breaking apart in clumps that cling to the fork like it's trying to escape. You scoop, lift, dump, repeat. Over and over. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like grain grinding, but smellier, and with a much higher risk of stepping in something awful. The animals don't care. The goats are chewing. One of the cows sighs loudly, as if she's the one doing the labor. A chicken struts across your path, boldly inspecting your progress like an unwelcome supervisor. You slip once, just slightly, and catch yourself with a grunt. You stare down at your foot, now wearing a sandal made entirely of unmentionables. You blink. You keep going. Historians agree that manure management was one of the core parts of medieval farm life, especially for households that didn't have access to servants or serfs. Dung was both a nuisance and a resource. It fed the compost, enriched the fields, and ironically helped feed the very animals that produced it through improved pasture growth. Nature's unpleasant circle. Some old texts even recommend saving the warmest dung for healing compresses, which you've always thought was a joke. You sincerely hope it was a joke. The work is hot despite the chill in the air. Your back is already slick with sweat beneath your tunic, and your hands are beginning to blister even through the leather scraps you tied around them. Every forkful of muck feels heavier than the last. You grunt, shift your stance, and keep going. You finally fill the wheelbarrow and begin to push it toward the compost heap. It wobbles like a drunk uncle at a feast, the one wheel threatening mutiny with every bump. You push with your whole body, muttering curses that are probably older than the village. When you reach the compost pile, you tip the barrow and empty its contents onto the top where it immediately begins to mingle with yesterday's contributions. The heat from the center of the pile is impressive, warm enough to fog your vision. The smell, too, reaches levels of artistry. If this heap ever exploded, the entire village would flee. You return to the barn. Again. Fill. Again. Dump. Again. And again. Eventually, the job is done, or at least done enough that you can walk without squelching. You prop the fork against the wall, stretch your aching back until something cracks, and wipe your forehead with a sleeve that's no longer fit for wiping anything. You take a moment to breathe, slowly, carefully, through your mouth. The animals seem vaguely satisfied. The floor of the barn looks passably clean. The compost heap is a little higher. The world spins on. As you step outside, a breeze finally kicks up, cool and gentle, carrying away just a hint of the barn's perfume. You lift your face to the sky, close your eyes, and let it wash over you. It's not glory, but it's a moment. Then someone yells, "Pigs out." You open your eyes. The pig, yes. That pig is trotting cheerfully down the lane with a clump of grass in its mouth and the unmistakable twinkle of rebellion in its eye. You sigh. Again. And take off running. You don't run so much as flail arms, pumping feet, slipping boots, squelching in every direction except forward. The pig is fast. Too fast. She's already cleared the compost heap, zipped through the neighbor's herb garden, and is now making a beeline for the common green like she's late for a party. You call her name, which changes daily depending on your mood. Today, it's you absolute menace. She ignores you naturally. Her little hooves thump cheerfully through the mud as she trots a long tail, flicking in defiance. She veers left. You veer right. A goose honks at both of you in protest. You narrowly avoid a cart rut and finally manage to grab her by the hindquarters. She squeals loud enough to wake the ancestors. You brace yourself, lean back, and somehow don't end up flat in the muck. Historians still argue whether pigs in medieval villages were more valuable as food or as compost generators. Either way, they were rarely fenced in, and escapes like this weren't uncommon. Some towns even had swineherds who spent their entire day doing exactly what you're doing now. You, unfortunately, are not a swineherd. You're just unlucky. You drag her backward step by muddy step, ignoring her increasingly theatrical squeals. A few neighbors peek out of their cottages to enjoy the show. One of them, an old woman with one good tooth and the sharpest tongue in the village, claps sarcastically as you pass. Back at the sty, you maneuver the pig through the gate latch it tight and collapse onto a nearby stump. She gives one last grunt of protest, then flops dramatically into the straw like a diva who didn't get her way. You glare. She yawns. You wipe your hands on your tunic again. It does nothing. Just as you catch your breath, the sky darkens slightly. A breeze picks up and you feel a familiar prickle along your neck. Not a chill. A warning. You glance up and see thick gray clouds rolling in from the west. Low, heavy, slow. Rain. Maybe. Or maybe worse. You know what this means. Time to secure the laundry, reinforce the roof straw, and check on the firewood. Again. Because if a storm hits and you're not ready, the whole house will smell like damp sheep for a week, and that's the best case scenario. But first, you make a quick stop at the garden behind the house where the cabbages have been struggling for weeks. You lean down and mutter an apology as you pick the slugs off their battered leaves. The soil is already too wet from last week's drizzle, and another storm might drown the whole plot. You give the cabbage a gentle pat. It leans, dramatically. You pause to scan the horizon. Maybe the clouds will pass. Maybe the wind will shift. You mutter a quick, half-sincere prayer to Saint Medard, the patron saint of bad weather, just in case. Historians still debate how much medieval people relied on saints versus sheer superstition when it came to weather. But whether it's folklore or faith, you're more than willing to try anything that might keep the sun shining a little longer. Back at the house, you help your brother drag a woven mat over the roof's leaky corner and pin it down with rocks. The thatch has seen better days. Maybe 5 winters ago, a full repair would take a team money and 3 days of dry weather. You have none of the above. You check the firewood next thin logs stacked beneath a slanted awning. You add a few more branches to the indoor pile just in case you're trapped inside later. They're damp, of course. Everything is. And still the clouds creep closer. You take a breath and look around. Pigs back in the sty. Garden's been warned. Roof patched. Firewood inside. You've chased, hauled, pinned, and prayed. All before the midday bell. You sit on the edge of the porch, more a plank than a structure, and let the cool wind wash over your face. Somewhere you hear the soft thump of thunder, distant but definite. You close your eyes, feel the weight of the sky pressing down, and prepare for whatever the afternoon decides to throw at you. Because this is the peasant's truth, the chores don't wait for weather. The clouds loom larger now, heavy and bruised, pressing down on the world like a wool blanket soaked through. Every movement you make feels slower, heavier, as if the air itself has thickened. You squint up at the sky, judging angles and guessing minutes, trying to predict how long until the rain begins its full performance. The wind picks up. Not violent, just insistent. It brushes over the fields, rustling the trees, tugging at the edges of your tunic. You pull your sleeves down and wrap your arms around yourself like it'll help. Then comes the bell. A slow, solemn clang echoes from the chapel tower on the far side of the village. It's not a call to prayer. It's not a celebration. It's just the sunrise bell, a polite announcement that the day has officially begun. Which is funny, because you've already lived a full one. You stand, stretch again, and take one last deep breath of clean air before the storm. Then you step back inside the cottage and begin the last bit of prep, a quick check on everything you've already checked just to be sure. Fire still crackling. Water still enough for washing. Tools still drying by the wall. Bread rising under a cloth, the dough soft and hopeful. Your family is now fully awake, pulling on boots, arguing over who ate the last pickled onion, and preparing for their own work in the fields or by the looms. You somehow are expected to keep going. Next up is the drying line. You left it out this morning, too tired to bring it in after chasing the pig. The wind is kicking up now, snapping the cloth like flags in a battle you are definitely losing. You dash outside and gather the damp tunics, the ragged aprons, the one wool sock that's been on its last leg since the last feast day. You shove them into a basket and haul them back inside, just as the first fat raindrop splashes against your nose. Too late. It's begun. The rain starts slow, just a patter on the thatch, but quickly builds into a steady drumbeat. It turns the dirt into a slick ribbon of brown puddles forming like traps in the path. You watch from the doorway as the world outside dims the colors, washing into one long watercolor of gray, green, and mud. You're inside now, which should feel like a break. It doesn't. The cottage leaks in 3 places. 4 if you count the drip near the firewood stack. You gather buckets and bowls and place them beneath each drop with the precision of someone who's done this far too many times. 1 drop, 2 drops. A steady rhythm of small annoyances. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants saw rainy days as an inconvenience or a blessing. For crops, a miracle. For roof repairs, laundry fire starting, and general morale, a slow-motion disaster. You wrap a cloth around your shoulders and return to the fire. You poke at the logs again, feeding it a few smaller sticks. The light flickers across the damp walls, turning the whole room into a flickering cave of movement and shadow. And you think, just for a moment, how strange it is to live a life where you can't plan further than an hour ahead. The weather decides. The tools decide. The goat decides. Your own body often doesn't feel like it's yours, aching in places you didn't know existed. Yet somehow you go on, because this is what the bell meant. The real work begins now. The hours in the field, the planting, the hauling, the weeding, the endless repetition of sun and soil and sweat. Everything before sunrise. That was just the opening act. You sit beside the fire, listening to the rain tick across the roof, and let your eyes drift closed just for a moment. You won't sleep, but your body demands a pause. The smell of wet wool smoke and faintly sour porridge hangs in the air. A chicken squawks outside. Someone steps in a puddle. The world continues. And you're still here, still upright, still breathing. And for now, that's enough. The storm outside continues its rhythm, a steady, endless drumming that seeps into your bones. You're back on your feet, of course, because pausing for too long invites suspicion and more chores. Someone will ask why you're sitting. Someone will assume you're slacking. So you stir, you wipe down the table, you busy your hands, even if your muscles beg for mercy. Because in this world, motion equals worth. The others have gone out now, cloaked in wool and determination, off to the fields, the pastures, the forest paths. You remain behind for now with one final task before the full labor of the day begins: tending the hearth, tidying the tools, and watching over the youngest sibling still curled in a bundle of linen in the corner. The fire has grown small again. You feed it softly, slowly. It crackles in gratitude. You pour warm water into a bowl for washing, one for faces, one for feet, one for the pot you'll scrub from breakfast. You rinse the bowls from earlier with a scrap of linen, swirling cold water around the rough interiors and drying them against your tunic. It leaves damp patches down your front. You've stopped caring. You check the door for leaks. You check the roof patch, still holding. You sigh and lean against the wall, listening. The storm outside masks most sounds, but not all. You hear someone shouting at a mule down the lane, a cartwheel squealing under pressure. Somewhere faintly, a child crying. Not yours, not your siblings, just one of many that fill this world of noise and need. And there, at the edge of it all, is a peculiar sort of quiet. Not silence, no, but a stillness. The kind that settles in when everything you've done today is invisible, unnoticed, but utterly essential. Historians rarely write about this kind of labor, not because it wasn't important, but because it was so constant, so ordinary, so expected that it didn't warrant ink. They wrote about kings and wars and saints who glowed in the dark. Not about you. Not about someone scraping a pot with fingers already raw from grinding, or someone who knows exactly how much straw is too much for the goats to trample. You are the forgotten engine of the era, and today, before the bell even rang, you fed the animals, milked a reluctant cow, cleaned out a barn, chased a pig across the village, hauled water twice, lit and tended the only source of heat, ground grain, cooked gruel, emptied chamber pots, repaired tools with twine and stubbornness, and prepped the entire family to survive another day. And yet, when the Lord rides by this afternoon, he will see your muddy boots and not your effort. He will glance at your hands and see only dirt, not devotion. He will nod perhaps if he's in a generous mood, but mostly he will not see you at all. Still, you'll keep going, because this is your place. Not glorious, not honored, but necessary. Outside, the rain slows, just a bit. You hear it tapering into mist, a softer cadence that makes the world feel almost suspended, a breath held between storms. You sit beside the fire, take the last sip of lukewarm water from the jug, and draw a rough wool blanket over your knees. Your shoulders drop, your head leans back, and now let the fire crackle beside you, slow and steady. Let the shadows dance along the wooden beams, their rhythm softer now, no longer urgent. The rain outside has dulled to a whisper, just a gentle tapping on the thatch, like fingers on a drum played in sleep. The sky, once heavy and angry, has softened. Its gray veil now hangs loosely, drifting over the fields and rooftops like a sigh. Your breath moves more slowly now, deep and low. Each exhale eases a knot in your shoulders, a weight in your chest. You've done more than most will ever know, and still here you are, warm, present, at peace. The room quiets. The baby stirs, then settles. The fire crackles, once then grows still. You are wrapped in the small, sturdy comfort of effort fulfilled. No titles, no thanks, but a quiet dignity. Let your thoughts loosen now. Let them drift. The tools are mended. The cow is calm. The pig is hopefully still where she belongs. And you've earned your rest. Let the world outside dissolve the mud, the wind, the bell. Let it all fade into the gentle hush of rain on straw. Sleep now, deeply. Tomorrow will come, but not yet. Now is just for you.